Malta and Gozo, and welcome to another edition of Lovin Daily. I'm your host, Jonathan Chilia, joined by my co-host, JP Atsapardi. We have a chock-a-block show today, so let's jump right into the headlines. First story of the day, good news for Malta as it officially passes the long-awaited MONEYVAL test. A new hotel on SIGH Hill has been approved by the planning authority despite geological fears for MDINA. Tomas Gaming gets a massive €233,000 fine for money laundering as the FIAU finds several players that spent thousands, hundreds of thousands in cash. A Maltese church is looking for an educator to pay them €22,000 to promote their anti-abortion agenda in schools. And persons of trust in Malta's ministries are considered frontliners for COVID-19 vaccine, allegedly skipping the queues. Now, beyond that, this evening, Lovin Malta and the Sharabank online collaboration continues with a really awesome show going live on Facebook tonight at 8:40. We'll talk about this a bit later. And stay tuned to the end of today's show because we've got a special guest interview with Yasmine Ellul, KSU's Drug Policy Officer, to talk about a recent survey that they've undertaken. JP, you want to start us off with the first story?
Absolutely. So perhaps one of the biggest stories to come out of yesterday, but kind of slipped under the radar for many people. I mean, it's been going on for years and years, but finally Malta passed the crucial MONEYVAL test. Thank God, a lot of people can, breathe finally, a weight off the shoulders of everyone working in the financial industry, businesses, just everyone in general in Malta, because obviously this MONEYVAL test, had huge ramifications for Malta. If it were to be grey listed, it could have huge implications of businesses coming here, investments coming here, foreign investment. Everyone was always looking out for when will we pass this MONEYVAL test, when will it happen? And finally yesterday, the nation's anti-money laundering regime announced that it passed the Council of Europe's MONEYVAL test. So what that means basically is Malta won't at the moment be grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force, it's good news for everyone in general. Being grey listed on this MONEYVAL list is puts us within countries that aren't like even in the EU, no countries on this grey list. So it really would be damning for Malta. But basically, this was happened in 2019 when Malta failed the initial MONEYVAL test. Since then, a lot has been done to kind of adjust processes and procedures and bring them up to the standard that's needed, including, bolstering the police's financial crimes unit and moving them out of Soriana and into a new office in Santa Venera. And they've been busy at work, obviously, over the past few weeks. We've seen that. And as well as, the €10,000 cash limit on the sales of property and other valuable items, and designs for a new asset recovery bureau were also recently launched. So Malta has upped its game in the MONEYVAL test, but it isn't the end of the road, right?
No, let's be very clear, this MONEYVAL test has been a dark cloud, a boogeyman, right over our shoulders, our financial future for a good few years now. But that's not the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome. In June, there will be an FATF test that will be looking into specifically how many people have been charged with money laundering in Malta, how many companies have been prosecuted, and how many assets have been confiscated. But as you said yourself, over the last few months and years, some massive pushes has been done in this area. I mean, let's be clear, people like Keith Gembry, Brian Tonna, yesterday's Michelle Rizzo of the Times, MFSP owner Matthew Potch, Darren De Bono, these have all been charged with money laundering over the last few months. So there has been action over there. But definitely, let's see what happens in June. Moving on to the next story. It had quite a bit of reaction yesterday, and I think even today online I've been seeing something. An 81-room hotel has been approved to be built on SIGH Hill, exactly where Tattinger's Club was. So I'm pretty sure you guys know the area. It's on the slope as you're going up to MDINA Rabat. This has been approved. The problem is, critics say that environmental studies, especially geological studies, have not been undertaken. The issue there is that it's on quite a slope. It seems to be quite a soft area. If you're going to be building, especially something so large, you definitely need to look into it. The MDINA local council itself actually criticized the application. They said that it was of, quote, extreme concern that this had been approved, and they were really worried that, the nearby bastions and fortifications, which are iconic, would be affected by the building of this hotel. This would be a 5-star hotel, by the way. So a little bit of a fancy hotel showing up in the Rabat MDINA area.
Yeah, no, at least it's 5-star. Let's say that. But no, like you said, there've been a lot of reactions to it, and obviously this week Lovin Malta covered a number of stories where these kind of geological fears have come into place, not just for hotels or the building of new buildings, but also existing buildings and construction sites where it's clear that there isn't enough being done in terms of assessing the geological impact of these construction works. We were talking earlier this week about the Birkirkara residence and that the home imminent collapse, and now we're seeing this with the SIGH Hill. So clearly, once again, we find ourselves in this place where we're not following the proper processes, the due diligence needed to ensure that everything's done safely. And you mentioned a lot of reactions this morning. The FAA NGO, called it the barbarians at the gates of MDINA.
Wow.
A bit hyperbolic, a bit over the top, but at the same time, I can understand totally where they're coming from. Moving on to our third story, and once again going back to money laundering and Malta's MONEYVAL and whatnot. We're now back to Thomas Group, who are now hit with a 233,000 fine for breaching money laundering regulations, with the FIAU uncovering a number of players splashing hundreds of thousands in cash, in person at the casino with little to no oversight. The investigation found that Thomas Group failed to implement several measures to address major threats to their money laundering supervisions, namely the extent of untraced cash drops from particular players and the possible collusion with customers. And one case, there was a customer who paid exclusively in cash and was never subject to a risk assessment. Now, obviously, when we talk about casinos and we see it in movies and all this stuff, casinos and in real life have some of the highest risk assessments, highest security, and to ensure that money laundering doesn't take place. Obviously, it's an area that's notorious with these kind of transactions and whatnot. So even in Malta, in principle, there are high standards and whatnot. But Thomas Group, obviously, which was owned by Thomas Gaming, which was owned by Thomas Group, which was led by Jorgen Fenech until his arrest with the connection with the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia, is obviously kind of seemed to be bypassing this thing. As also, there was also communication with the former MGA CEO and Jorgen Fenech. So clearly this is a bit of a iffy area. And right now, actually, the CEO of Thomas Group, Patrick De Manuel, is currently under investigation as part of a money laundering and trading and influence investigation.
It really never ends in Malta. If you look at the details of this case, you can find everything on lovinmalta.com. There's actually a breakdown of some individual cases. I was looking through some of them. There was one about a housewife that kind of stood out to me. This housewife had dropped off over 41,000 euros in cash over 10 months. And then 37,000 euros in cash over 10 days, all in cash. Even though she had done this, she was still considered a low-level risk. So, when you look into the details of how they operated, it's no wonder that red flags were raised.
Yeah,
but talking about large amounts of money, moving on to the next story, a Maltese church is looking to find an educator of some form, maybe a teacher, to pay 20,000 euros a year to promote their, quote, to discourage, quote, anti-life attitudes in church. So the delegate for Catholic education, on behalf of the anti-abortion group Life Network Foundation, which we've previously reported about, have issued a call for this teacher, looking to promote life-affirming choices. Now, however you feel about abortion, whether you're for it or against it, my issue here is that, organizations are looking for individuals to pay financially to promote an agenda of some form in a school. I think this is quite nuts. Now, it's one thing talking about, environmental issues or sustainability, but when we're talking about abortion, such a sensitive topic, either side of the debate, whether it's pro or anti-abortion, paying someone tens of thousands a year to go to schools, speak to youths, and try to push an agenda is actually quite shocking to me. I really do find it questionable. Lovin Malta did reach out to the Life Network Foundation to kind of get a better understanding of what they're thinking. We see this kind of stuff in America, for example, in the UK, but the Life Network Foundation did not respond to our request for comment. What do you make of this, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, having grown up where I grew up and where, secular and religious life is completely separated, I do find it incredibly strange and worrying that that these kind of initiatives and that someone is going to be paid to promote these certain agendas. Obviously, and when you're dealing with young children as well, they're very vulnerable to or susceptible to all these outside influences and opinions and whatnot. And I feel like pushing just one agenda and making them think that this is the way to go and this is what you should believe is not a good thing. They should be open to debate. Schools should be an area where they're encouraged to challenge things, encouraged to debate and form their own opinions, and not have someone who's paid to go there and spew this certain doctrine, this certain agenda and propaganda. I think it's just not right and should be taken a lot more seriously, especially when someone's being paid 22,000 euros to do it. And moving on to our last story now, concerning persons of trust in Malta's ministries who were apparently considered frontliners for the COVID-19 vaccine. And what basically this meant is that these persons of trust apparently jumped the queue in the priority list for the jab. This was revealed yesterday in Parliament when David Take, opposition MP David Take, asked a parliamentary question. 6 ministries confirmed that their persons of trust were considered frontliners according to the regulations. This were the Ministry for Elderly and Active Aging, the Ministry for Solidarity and Family, the Ministry for Energy, the Ministry for Education, the Ministry for Home Affairs, and the Transport Ministry. The Health Ministry, which is obviously in the front lines of the COVID-19 vaccine campaign, completely ignored the question, instead referencing the total number of people in Malta who had received a dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. This may be worrying on a number of levels. Obviously, jumping the queue because of your position isn't acceptable in any circumstance, even though we do see it across the world, and we have been seeing it everywhere. But obviously, this issue of also persons of trust in Malta is brought to question again. There was the Venice Commission a couple of years ago released a damning report on it, and apparently in Malta at the time, at least, there were about 700 people who were considered persons of trust. So this is a potential, we're not speculating here to a certain extent, potential 700 people who had just jumped the queue to, receive the vaccine instead of waiting in line.
Yeah, obviously over the last few months, Malta has done a massive push for its inoculation program. At this point, 1 in 5 people in Malta have been vaccinated. 325,000 people have received 1 dose. So it's been a major push. So I'm hoping in a few months, this won't even be an issue anymore. That said, until we get to that point, there is a staggered approach to the rollout of the vaccine for a reason. The government has a plan. So if you're abusing your position inside a ministry to get this vaccine, shame on you. Before we jump into today's special guest interview, I just want to remind you that today, Sharabank Online will be returning with another deep dive into the cannabis white paper. It will be online this evening on Lovin Malta's Facebook at 8:40 p.m. You definitely want to check it out. Pep Piazza Party will be speaking to one of the architects of the white paper proposal, lawyer Dr. Alex Sherry Herrera. We actually had him on Lovin Daily a couple of weeks back to discuss, so it's going to be very interesting. And this comes just a few days after Sharabank spoke to Dun Victor Grek, the 91-year-old founder of Caritas, who also spoke about his views on the cannabis white paper. It's very, very interesting. They're getting both sides of the story, so this is a very hot topic. You definitely want to check it out. So definitely tune in this evening at 8:40. Right now we're going to cut to a trailer of tonight's episode, and when we are back, we'll be joined by KSU Drug Policy Officer Yasmine Ellul.
Għala 7 grammi, għalix mux 5, għalix mux 6. Jien ngħidlek il-pusher vera tieħu pjaċir b'dil-white paper. Ġifieri qed ngħidu l-tfal, ma jistgħux jitilgħu fuq il-bejt. Jista' jkollok maġistrat jew mħallef illi jiżraw il-pjant id-dar mhux hekk.
Il-white paper tal-ħaxixa. Niċċelenġjaw lil min kitibha fuq Sharabank Online u Lovin Malta.
So here we are back in the Lovin Malta offices with Yasmine Ellul, KSU Student Affairs Officer. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So recently you guys did a survey, Beyond the Influence, right?
Yes.
I was looking at some of the statistics, really interesting stuff. Before we get into the numbers, what was the idea behind the survey?
So at the moment, KSU is carrying out a campaign called Your Future You. So as part of this campaign, we have a smaller mini campaign, which is Beyond the Influence. So the Beyond the Influence campaign is basically a drug use awareness campaign. We've had several initiatives as part of the campaign, including panel discussions, Q&A sessions, articles, social media content, including videos and infographics, all linked to drug use. And obviously, one of the initiatives was also this survey. What we wanted to achieve out of the survey is that we wanted to ask sort of students and youth perceptions on both the use of drugs and the regulation of drugs in Malta. Now, it's important to note that while this is all relevant in terms of the white paper that has been recently been published by the government towards the strengthening of the legal framework on the responsible use of cannabis, the survey was done before the actual white paper was published. So obviously, students and respondents' perceptions were not influenced by the white paper since it hadn't been published yet.
No, very, very important point, but very, very timely, super relevant. So what are some of the main findings? Like I said, I was looking at some of the numbers and there were some really interesting findings.
Yes, I think that actually the findings were quite surprising in reality, as in we had expected to sort of have high numbers of people who had tried drugs, for example, or people who are still currently making use of drugs. However, it turned out that I think the most relevant figure is that 67% of the respondents have used drugs at least once in their lifetime. And 98% of which is even a higher figure, almost everyone, have used cannabis.
Wow.
Now, even more than half of the respondents are still using drugs up to today. So it's quite relevant, and the findings are quite noteworthy. What we've done is we've split up the survey into 4 different sections, and the sections all tackle sort of different aspects. So the first section was focused on the use of drugs by the respondents. The second section was focused on the perceptions of the respondents on drug use and the different effects of different drugs, for example. And then we had the third section, which focused on the perceived impacts of COVID-19 on drug use. And the fourth section was basically more general in terms of the perceptions on the regulation on both a national and EU level.
No, that's really interesting. So practically every Maltese university student who has tried drugs at least once in their life has used cannabis, 98%.
Yes, 98% of the respondents. Now we've had around 1,000 respondents. Obviously, this is in the whole university population, so it's good to know. However, given that the survey was done amongst just students and youth, it's actually a very good number. It's very positive. I think it's around 3 times the representative number of university students it would be. So yes, and basically also with regards to cannabis, it was not also seen that most students have tried it, but there were also very, very important and interesting figures. So for example, most of the respondents thought that cannabis is not, so maybe 31% thought that cannabis is never dangerous from use.
Wow, okay.
From the different drugs mentioned, and it's important to know that obviously tobacco and alcohol were not included in the definition of drugs unless they were specifically stated. Most people think that sort of cannabis is very easily accessible, that it has positive effects can be used for therapeutic measures, and that it is not dangerous, basically. When asked, contrastingly, when asked more in general about the negative effects of drugs, so most students did actually realize, I think 75% did actually realize that drugs may cause harmful effects on one's body and mind. So there is sort of the understanding and there is the knowledge. I think that that proves a point as well, that I think students should be consulted more often, because it's not like we don't know what the harmful effects are or what the consequences are. But we've given the appropriate tools, we can sort of make decisions for ourselves and make informed and safe decisions.
No, I think the survey is actually very insightful. It shows exactly what you're saying. Students are often at the front lines. They are very well aware of what the situation is. So getting their feedback is really important, especially if you're going to be proposing changes in laws, etc. So I wanted to speak to you a little bit about drug use in relation to the pandemic. Did drug use among Maltese students go up in the pandemic?
So this was actually seen from both our survey and another questionnaire which was carried out. It was another study carried out by the Faculty of Social Wellbeing at the University of Malta a few months back as well. And it was shown from both our survey and the other study which I'm mentioning that drug use did actually increase during COVID-19. There have been, I think, several studies on an EU level as well which also show this. Basically, our survey, the respondents have stated that they think that drug use has either increased the use has increased in general, or that users have started using more frequently rather than having new people using. So it's quite, I think it's quite noteworthy. There are various effects, there are various reasons for this, I think. Increased isolation, anxiety, financial instability. So I think these are all issues that we are currently facing as students at the moment in light of the pandemic, not just as students, but basically everyone. But for us most of us are going into a new career now. We have no idea what's going to happen. So yes, unfortunately it has.
So overall, what would you say generally the students' view is towards drug use? Is it positive? Is it fearful? Is it curious? Is it not impressed? What's the general vibe?
I think from the last section, mainly it was seen that most students actually feel that the drug laws in Malta are not liberal enough. In fact, most even agree that rather than just being decriminalized, the personal use of small quantities of maybe softer drugs can also be legalized. So this is also very pertinent as well. And apart from that, the students, the respondents who took our survey also think that the further legalization of drugs might help weaken the black market, decrease the use of harmful quality drugs.
How good.
And
Very
basically, that some benefits can be derived from the actual continuing of decriminalizing and possibly even legalizing if we ever go to that. As KSU, we've also released a position paper on the white paper that has been issued by the government, and we've also sent it for the public consultation as well. Obviously, while it's a positive step in the right direction, there are still many shortcomings which we feel haven't been addressed at all. We can go on and on about the shortcomings, but I think that we need a better educational campaign, first of all. We need more detail, more clarity, and definitely something which is more credible.
I would totally agree with you on that one. Coming to the end of the interview, I wanted to speak to you a little bit about, we touched upon it a little bit, but the effect the pandemic's had on students. So it's been about a year since there were physical lessons at university. You yourself study there. You know, what's it been like? You know, it's been 1 year now. It's been over 1 year, actually. Is there a sense of normality when you go to lessons now? Is it the norm, or is it still a bit weird?
It's weird. So myself, I go to university often still because obviously I work at the KSU very often, at the KSU office very often, and it's weird. We're looking out of the window and there are no students on campus at all. It's quite disheartening in a way, you know. So for example, for first year students, I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. They've gone into a completely new adventure, a completely new experience without actually knowing what it is that they're going into. So they've never experienced actual physical lectures on campus. They've never experienced actual physical exams.
Wow.
So everything has changed, not just the lectures, but even the way we do exams. Automatically, because we're doing lectures and exams differently, we've had to change the way we're studying as well, because obviously you have to adapt. So it was quite, I have to say, I think that the general sentiment is that we miss uni, as in we still have the online lectures, but it doesn't compare to being sat in a lecture room with your friends, sort of. If you've missed something out on the lecture, you can sort of look at your friends, sort of what was that, or else if you have an hour between one lecture and another, you can sort of go on quad and have a coffee and
all
chat. But so obviously, I think that, as we've mentioned before, the isolation effects are there as well.
Yasmine Ellul, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So if people want to have a look at the numbers, is there a website they can go to?
Yes, we've published the report on the Your Future EU website. It is also on the KSU Facebook page, so it's easily accessible.
Guys, so definitely check that out. Really interesting stats. We'll probably be featuring some of them on Lovin Malta later on this week. Thanks once again for joining us. And everyone viewing at home, have a day full of lovin'.